Imagine this. You walk into a room and instinctively adjust yourself. Not your clothes, your being. You straighten your back, fix your expression, soften your voice, or perhaps harden it, depending on what will make you more acceptable in this particular moment. You smile, not because you feel joy, but because you've learned that people are more comfortable when you do. You perform, not on stage, not in front of an audience, but in the most dangerous theater of all, your life. And no one notices. In fact, they reward you for it. They call you confident, polished, well-spoken, successful. You're praised for your adaptability, for your composure, for your likability. But beneath the applause, a quiet unease grows. Because while they love the mask, they've never met the one beneath it. And maybe neither have you. What if the version of you that the world claps for isn't actually you? What if you've been rewarded, promoted, praised, not for your authenticity, but for your ability to hide it? What if the most dangerous kind of success is the kind that disconnects you from your real self? We're taught to be ourselves, until being ourselves makes someone else uncomfortable. Then we're taught to edit, shrink, adjust, smile. We learn to trade truth for approval, vulnerability for strategy, depth for presentation, and here lies the great contradiction. The more we perform, the more we are praised. But the more we are praised, the more we forget who we are. What happens when you wake up one day and realize that the life you built was designed to please everyone but you? What does it cost to be the version of yourself that others find palatable? And how deep does this performance go? Into your work, your relationships, your values, your identity. How do you know when your success is actually a form of self-betrayal? And why does society reward that betrayal? These are not just personal questions. They are existential ones. Because if society rewards the false self, what happens to the real one? Let's go deeper. Let's expose the architecture of this illusion and uncover how the modern world has built a system that celebrates masks while burying the soul beneath them. To understand how we arrived here, where applause greets the persona and silence greets the soul, we must look beneath the surface of culture, psychology, and identity itself. Because the false self doesn't appear overnight. It is crafted slowly, systematically, and often unconsciously by a world that teaches you how to survive by becoming someone else. The birth of the mask. From early childhood, we are conditioned to abandon parts of ourselves in exchange for safety, acceptance, and love. Cry too loudly, you're dramatic, ask too many questions, you're difficult, express a need, you're needy, so you learn to shapeshift. You suppress your anger to be agreeable. You swallow your confusion to appear competent. You hide your sadness to keep the peace. By the time you're old enough to choose your own clothes, you've already been taught to wear something far more enduring, a personality that pleases others but protects very little of your truth. Carl Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to adapt to the demands of society. It's necessary, but dangerous when mistaken for the self. The psychology of the false self. Donald Winnicott, a British psychoanalyst, described the false self as the defensive structure built to appease external expectations at the cost of internal truth. In his view, the false self emerges not as a choice, but as a survival mechanism, especially in environments where authenticity was not safe. Over time, this false self becomes adaptive, then automatic. You no longer ask, "What do I feel?" You ask, "What do they want to see?" You stop living from the inside out and begin performing from the outside in. The tragedy? Society doesn't just accept this performance, it celebrates it. We reward emotional suppression as professionalism. We praise overcompensation as confidence. We promote compliance as leadership. And so, the mask gets reinforced, not by malice, but by misunderstanding. Nietzsche and the lie of social morality. Friedrich Nietzsche warned of herd morality, a collective standard of behavior rooted not in individual truth, but in conformity. He believed that most people suppress their real desires and instincts to gain social approval, calling this the slave morality that trades freedom for false virtue. In this view, authenticity is dangerous because it threatens the comfort of the group. Better to be predictable than real, better to be admired than known, better to belong falsely than risk standing alone. In Nietzsche's world, the false self isn't an accident. It's the price of admission. Schopenhauer and the Theater of Appearances. Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that the world we interact with is not reality itself, but a representation, a stage where appearances dominate truth. In this metaphorical theater, what matters is not who you are, but how you are perceived. Thus, the more skilled you are at crafting your image, the more you are rewarded, regardless of what's happening underneath. And in a society driven by curated profiles, status updates, and marketable personas, this performance becomes constant. But here's the paradox. The more you perform, the less you feel. The less you feel, the less you know who you are. The cultural machine of reward. Modern capitalism doesn't just accept the false self, it thrives on it. It sells you ideals of success, beauty, confidence, happiness, then hands you tools to imitate them, not to embody them. Workplaces reward agreeable silence over challenging truth. Social media rewards likability over depth. Politics rewards performance over principle. And you, torn between inner truth and outer validation, begin to doubt that your real self could ever be good enough, let alone celebrated. So you keep feeding the mask, and the world keeps clapping. But deep down, a fracture grows. Because every time the false self is rewarded, the real self feels a little more invisible. And that's the core of the problem. We're not just wearing masks to get by. We're being trained to believe the mask is who we are. And once that belief settles in, something essential begins to die. Not suddenly, but slowly. Let's explore what that slow death looks like. How this hidden disconnection leaks into every part of our lives, our relationships, our work, our sense of meaning, without us even realizing it. Because the consequences of rewarding the false self don't end at performance. They end at emptiness. It doesn't happen all at once. There is no alarm when the false self takes over, no warning bell when the gap between who you are and who you perform begins to widen. It begins in the quiet, in the subtle, in the everyday. You catch yourself laughing when you're not amused, nodding when you don't agree, praising things you secretly resent, smiling because you're supposed to, not because you feel anything worth showing. And at first, it seems harmless. But it never stops there. Because every time the false self is rewarded, the true self recedes a little further into the shadows. Emotional numbness as survival. Living as the false self requires a kind of emotional editing, the constant suppression of feelings that don't fit the role you're expected to play. You flatten your joy so it doesn't make others uncomfortable. You hide your grief so you won't appear fragile. You mute your anger so you can stay likable. You even dull your excitement lest it seem too much. Over time, this self-censorship becomes internalized. You forget what your authentic emotions even feel like. You lose contact with your instincts. You stop trusting your reactions. And you start mistaking your adaptation for your identity. This is where the numbness sets in, not as apathy, but as armor. Not because you don't feel, but because you've learned that feeling is unsafe. Relationships built on masks. The false self doesn't just isolate you from yourself, it isolates you from others. When you show the world only a curated version of yourself, you attract relationships based on that version, not the real you. You find yourself surrounded by people who admire your confidence, your positivity, your resilience, but they don't actually see your pain, your confusion, your contradictions, because you haven't shown them. And you can't resent people for not loving your real self if you've never let them meet it. This creates a profound loneliness. You're praised, but not known. You're loved, but not felt. You're included, but not understood. So even in connection, you feel alone. Because connection without truth isn't intimacy, it's performance. Work without meaning. The false self is often highly functional. It gets the promotion, it leads the meeting, it builds the brand, it earns the recognition. But inside, it feels hollow. Because when you climb a ladder built for someone else's definition of success, every step takes you further from what matters. You become excellent at things you don't care about, efficient in systems you don't believe in, respected in a world that has no idea who you really are. And one day, you look around and realize you've achieved everything and feel nothing. Not because you're ungrateful, but because the self who accomplished it isn't the self who was hungry for meaning. That hunger was buried under expectations, performance, and applause. Chronic self-doubt. Living as the false self creates a constant undercurrent of imposter syndrome. Not because you're inadequate, but because you're misaligned. Deep down, you know you're not being fully honest. You know you're editing. You know the version of you the world celebrates is only a partial truth. And so even when you succeed, it feels undeserved. Because the part of you that knows the truth refuses to accept credit for a performance. This breeds internal conflict. Do they love me, or the mask I wear? Do I belong here, or have I just fooled everyone? Would they still respect me if they saw the real me? These questions don't go away. They just get louder when you're alone. Exhaustion. Without explanation. There is a unique kind of fatigue that comes from being out of alignment with yourself. It's not physical exhaustion. It's existential. You wake up tired. You dread the day before it begins. You go through motions that once thrilled you and now feel meaningless. Why? Because maintaining the false self is draining. You are constantly anticipating what others want, editing your words and tone, performing emotional neutrality, managing the gap between how you feel and how you act. It's like carrying a mask made of lead. And no matter how many vacations, productivity hacks, or wellness routines you try, nothing touches the root cause. You're not living from your center. You're living from a shell. A silent identity crisis. Eventually, something cracks. It may come as burnout, or a breakup, or a breakdown, or a night where everything is quiet, and you suddenly realize you have no idea who you are when you're not being who you're supposed to be. This is the moment of disintegration, not destruction, but the collapse of an identity that was never fully yours. It's painful, it's disorienting, but it's also the beginning of something radical, the return to your real self. Because here is the truth. A life built on the false self will always end in disconnection. From purpose, from others, from your own soul. And it's not your fault. You were trained to adapt, rewarded for the mask, celebrated for the performance, but that doesn't mean you're trapped, because once you see the pattern, you can break it. Let's talk about that next. Let's talk about what it means to rebel against the reward system that keeps you small. Let's talk about how to reclaim the self you buried to survive. It doesn't begin with burning everything down. It begins with noticing, a pause before the performance, a discomfort in the middle of applause, a flicker of truth beneath a practiced smile. This is the seed of rebellion, not a loud defiance, but a quiet, powerful refusal to keep abandoning yourself in exchange for approval. Because the most radical act in a world that rewards the false self is to be real. Step 1. Identify the mask. Before you can remove the mask, you have to see it. Ask yourself, where do I edit myself the most? When do I feel most disconnected from what I'm saying or doing? What parts of me do I only show in solitude or never at all? These questions aren't easy. They're not meant to be. They are meant to disrupt the automatic, to interrupt the loop where behavior is driven by expectation instead of alignment. The rebellion begins the moment you tell the truth, to yourself first, then to the world. Step 2. Let the false self collapse. This will feel like grief, because it is. The false self wasn't all bad. It kept you safe. It helped you survive. It gave you a script when the world demanded performance. But it's time to let go. This means saying no when you're expected to say yes, admitting you don't know, don't care, or don't agree, reclaiming silence where you used to over-explain, allowing imperfection to be visible. Each of these acts chips away at the armor. And yes, people will notice. Some will back away. Others will be drawn closer. But you will finally begin to feel whole, because the energy you once spent performing becomes fuel for presence. Step 3. Build an identity from the inside out. The false self was built in response to the outside world. The true self is built in relationship with your inner world. This is not about becoming who you should be. It's about remembering who you were before the world taught you to be afraid of yourself. Start with slowness, stillness, small acts of honesty. Let your values lead, not trends, not algorithms, not approval metrics. Redefine success by alignment. Redefine beauty by aliveness. Redefine worth by truth. This is the foundation of a real self. Messy, complex, contradictory, alive. Step 4. Make peace with being misunderstood. Not everyone will understand your rebellion. People who benefited from your false self may resist your truth. People invested in performance may mock your authenticity. People who fear their own reflection may reject yours. Let them. Your job is not to be palatable. It is to be free. And freedom comes at a price. The willingness to walk away from the applause. To walk toward yourself. Step 5. Protect the real you. The real self is sacred. It must be protected, not hidden, protected. From environments that force you to shrink. From relationships that only love your surface. From systems that reward compliance over creativity. Build rituals, spaces, and communities that honor your depth. Create art. Have slow conversations. Sit in silence. Tell the truth. The more you feed your real self, the less seductive the false rewards become. Because real peace makes the performance obsolete. This is how the rebellion unfolds. Not all at once, not in fury, but in clarity. You stop running. You stop pretending. You stop choosing comfort over congruence. And the person you meet in the mirror, for the first time, they're not a role, not a mask, not a projection. They're you, and you remember, that was always enough. There is a moment. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. There's no certificate, no applause, no headline, but something inside you shifts, quietly, irrevocably, and you see it. The life you were praised for was never your own. The admiration, the accomplishments, the image, none of it fed your soul. It fed the version of you the world could accept, not the version that longed to be free. And here lies the ultimate truth. The false self wins approval. The true self finds peace. Approval is loud. It's addictive. It's fleeting. It keeps you chasing. But peace? Peace is quiet. It's whole. It doesn't demand performance. It doesn't change depending on who's watching. It is the feeling of finally belonging to yourself. The real self was never broken. You've spent years trying to fix yourself. But what if the self you were trying to fix wasn't you? What if the anxiety, the numbness, the disconnection weren't signs that you were broken, but signs that you were living out of alignment? The false self is always at war. War with emotion, war with imperfection, war with authenticity. But the true self doesn't need to be liked. It needs to be lived. And the peace you've been searching for, it doesn't come from success or validation. It comes the moment you stop abandoning the parts of you that never asked for permission to exist. Stillness as the final stage of rebellion. When you reclaim your truth, the world feels different. You stop seeking validation in every interaction. You stop needing to be the smartest, the funniest, the most impressive. You stop chasing relevance and start living in resonance. You begin to prefer stillness over spectacle, depth over performance, presence over perfection. This is not regression, this is returning to a self that was never broken, only buried. Why the world needs the real you. The irony is this: when you finally stop performing, you give others permission to do the same. Your truth becomes a mirror. Your courage becomes contagious. Your depth becomes a beacon for those still lost in their roles. Because this isn't just about you. It's about healing a world built on inauthenticity. It's about refusing to uphold systems that reward suppression. It's about creating a new model of value, one rooted in truth, not performance. And that begins with a single powerful act: being fully, unapologetically, inconveniently yourself. The invitation. You don't need to fix the world. You just need to stop lying to it. You don't need to burn everything down. You just need to stop hiding who you are. You don't need to find yourself in the future. You just need to stop abandoning who you were before the world taught you to be afraid. Because underneath every false self is a real one still waiting to be claimed. Not earned, not perfected, just remembered. And once you remember, the mask doesn't fit anymore. The game doesn't tempt you anymore. And the piece you thought was out there was inside you the whole time. You're not here to be impressive. You're here to be honest. And in a world of applause for illusions, that honesty is the most powerful thing you'll ever offer. Welcome back.